Class B, not for us, for a rival, but that was a great job on his part. I thought Katie did a great job, kind of summing up what's going on at the high school. We have added a monthly, calling it a riot recognition rally, where we pull the school together during that Muse advisory block and just recognize students of the month. We're doing a teacher of the month, have little interclass competitions, and so that's being well received. I want to go down and talk about the professional development. There's been a lot over the last month. I just want to highlight, we really want to bring down our chronic absenteeism. That's a number that Every Student Succeeds Act requires us to report to the state. We were at 16% last year, and we want to, even though that was the second lowest in the area, we want to bring that down. We want to keep chipping away at that. And so our assistant, Sam Runco and Troy Wagstaff have attended a couple of workshops to get some ideas around how we can bring those numbers down. We sent a crew down to the Computer Technology Educators of Maine conference, again, continuing to try to integrate technology, get students connected and hooked into technology. Really glad we could send our whole math department to a day-long workshop on integrating technology into the classroom. That's an area where we can certainly improve. The writing workshop that took place on site back in October, that was really well received by that group, and so that they've been meeting and talking about how we can continue the momentum and some of that work around writing across the curriculum, and then just developing a set of common strategies around developing writing skills. And then finally, that October in-service day around social emotional learning was also really well received at the high school. I wasn't sure what the reception would be, and so the work that we did during that day, certainly a lot of teachers interested and wanting to know more about how we can incorporate that at the high school. So. The data, we'll look at that in December. I think there's some interesting numbers in the recently released results. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions? Nope. Thanks.
Okay.
We'll just stay close, Reg.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so next up we have update on OHS recruiting. Is there a handout?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is just our principal at OHS leads the charge to recruit out of students, which make up about half of the student body at Orono High School. And aside from the cultural contributions, they're a significant part of the budget too. So board's just been taking an interest in wanting to make sure we're putting the resources into it that we need to do to be successful at that.
So before we start talking about the recruiting aspect, I put together some numbers that we're going to look at as a recruiting committee as a starting point, and just to see where we are as far as our sending towns. I looked back 2 years ago when our enrollment was at 363 to this fall, where our October enrollment was 334, and just to explain kind of some of these numbers. I think that the top part seems self-explanatory. By our sending towns, the increase or decrease in enrollment over those 2 years. A couple of numbers that jump out at me. Greenbush was an increase of 7. Milford was a decrease of 8. So I think that's an area that we can focus on. The rest are relatively stable, and overall, -1, -3. So an overall decrease of 7 students over the last 2 years from those sending towns. The next 3 lines are around superintendent's agreements, basically our international students and our Orono residents. 2 numbers there are the decrease in our international students for this year, and that tuition certainly has a negative impact on the budget. and then the decrease in the Orono residents over those last 2 years.
Yeah, most of the others. Yeah, and the bottom is that, I mean, that was identified in the enrollment study that our neighboring towns had had a dip in enrollments in the 8th grade, and that was probably what was driving the high school, and that certainly seems to be supported here, that was a big part of what was happening. I mean, I didn't do the calc. Looks to me like actually our yield, percent of those students that came might have actually even gone up, even though the number of students went down, just because of how much the students went down. So that's really helpful to see that in black and white. And it's good news that it's back up again. And just a general comment for people who are listening. This is something that the enrollment study has seen, that there's this kind of dip right around 8th, 9th, 10th grade in population. And then, at least in Orono, we talk about the growing schools. That's mostly in ASA in the middle school right now, and it's moving up to the high school. But so, don't overgeneralize from the high school numbers. There's 3 schools, and our big numbers are in the places that are going to be in our district for a long time. And so, but it is really helpful to see those actual 8th grade numbers for the other towns.
Yeah.
Would you, I know you mentioned you have a committee, would you have, I know you're just starting, this is very early, but would you just expand on the process?
So big picture, we're starting committees at the high school, continual improvement committees. We started talking about a month ago as a faculty. We basically, not to bore you with the details here, but we have monthly department meetings, but we have common planning built into our schedule every other day for departments during that Muse advisory time. So the days either teachers have their advisory, the opposite days they have planning time with the department. So we didn't really have as much need for that monthly department meeting. And so we're using that time for committees. And so we're developing a set of committees that will meet monthly, and recruiting is going to be one of those. They haven't met officially yet to start designing, but their task will be, big picture will be around recruiting. I think the more details will be around taking a look at our step-up day, taking a look at our visits out to the 8th graders, taking a look at our follow-up after step-up day. How do we follow up with all the 8th graders that visit? And then any ideas that they have, my message will be kind of spare no expense, that the board supports whatever they want to do in this, whether it's mailing, marketing, I say spare no expense, within reason, no expense. So spare no reasonable expense, yeah. So, we're early into it. It's the timing of it is just wrapped up first quarter. Report cards went out November 9th. We've had 4 days of school in the last 2 weeks. So, but this is a priority as we start going into December. And so I don't have any details, any kind of output from the committee, but that will be one that meets. We'll have 4 or 5 other committees that.
Great. Sounds like we're going full
Yeah.
bore. Just one thought. Any students from the outlying towns involved in the planning process?
Not yet. I mean, we will, when we visit the 8th graders, make sure that we bring students from that town with us. We certainly, as we plan Step-Up Day, we want students involved in the planning of Step-Up Day. But I want the committee to meet first and kind of see how they, how the student voice will be heard as we do this.
Another random thought, which feel free to say it's ridiculous, but would surveying our students from outlying towns about why they chose Orono, would that be helpful information, or do you feel like they already have a good handle on it?
No, I think it's absolutely. I don't think we have a good handle on it. I think, I'll say that our group from Milford was reduced this year. I don't know why. Sometimes it's just they travel in packs, and that pack of friends decided to go somewhere else. But I don't think we have a definitive idea of why students who are choosing are choosing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is a travel and pack phenomenon where groups of friends are up one year and down another year from a town. But I'm just curious, is it sports, is it arts, is it academics? Might just be interesting to find
Yeah.
out what's really driving decisions.
Yeah.
that
I
we
think
can
if you're gonna
emphasize.
survey the students, you should survey the parents as well.
Mm, Yep.
Because they may have different answers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's really two sets of,
two stakeholders in those
yes,
decisions.
so I think it's a good idea. I think we should do both, for
Yeah.
sure. So just to follow up on one of the questions Brian had, do you know who's on the committee for faculty?
I know 2 definites, and then it'll probably be a committee of about 7 or 8.
Okay, so you're still
About
filling
10
out.
people are interested, and so,
And then one other question, I don't know if this is true or not, this is hearsay. So I was told by an acquaintance who's from Sending community that in their experience, at least some of the schools that we might be competing with, in addition to inviting 8th graders to their step-up day, invite 7th graders as well. Do you know if that's true, or if it is,
I haven't
how
heard of
common
that,
is?
but someone may be doing that now. I haven't heard of it, but
Okay.
I don't know if Bangor does that, or, yeah.
One other thing that committee might want to think about as they start focusing their efforts on recruiting is that I think a tool that is useful for us is that we do have a number of kids from surrounding communities who participate in some of the town sporting activities over the course of the year. And if they have a good experience there and make friends, that makes it more likely that they're going to come here. I mean, the track program is one obvious example. Orono Youth Football is another. So that might be, they might want to reach out to some of those people involved to, get ideas on
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
they can use that in their efforts.
I mean, I think one thing that's working in our favor is I do believe our faculty are on board with the need to recruit, and that hasn't always been, my experience at my previous school was some could see the value of it, others would say, why are we spending all this time? They know where they're going already. Why are we trying to convince them? And, certainly over my past couple of years here, there's maybe been a shift, but I feel like teachers see the value of a step-up day, of recruiting. We need these students. We want them to choose Orono. It allows us to provide the programming that we do. And so there aren't a lot of naysayers on staff that see this as a waste of time, see this as, we could be doing something different with that time. So,
Good, that's
so I
good
think
to
that's a
hear.
positive thing.
Absolutely.
And I think part of that is the reality of a budget. I think they also understand that as a small school, one kid makes a difference.
I know we talked about this during budget time, and I think we were just speculative at that point about the international student change. Do we have any further information about what Mackenzie's seeing and hearing?
Well,
Travels?
yeah, it's not great. I mean, overall, there's schools like MCI, Lee Academy that have really had a reduction. I think there's been an overall reduction in international students, especially at the schools that have a boarding, like dormitories or, and there's some theories out there. I don't want to, some of it is just the climate, some of it is the political climate, and so, but it's an overall kind of downturn. Some of it is competition, kind of everyone's going after these students, everyone's kind of, not everyone, but, the schools that are in the international market are going after kind of similar, kind of the same pool of candidates. And so, I know Mackenzie has a trip to Vietnam and Korea in January, and so we're not just focused on a single market like China. She's been to Europe this fall, she'll go to Asia in January, but I feel like she does have a pretty broad view of who our potential students are. But in general, there is a downturn in international enrollments kind of across the country, but certainly in Maine. And some have been in the news around layoffs because of the decrease in international enrollment. So, but Mackenzie's optimistic. She feels like we can meet a target. So 15, like we did 2 years ago, but I think we'll have more than 9.
Yeah, I have the same sense that you just said.
Yeah.
When Orono started this, whatever it was, 8 years ago, we were an early mover, but not as early as some, but still a pretty
Yeah.
early mover. And It's just, every school's doing it, it's much more competitive, and like you said, the overall numbers are down, so it's a tough environment. But this one, well, I said it for the first one too, there's certainly a monetary consequence, but there's also a cultural consequence. I think it's fantastic that we have students from all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, even if it turns into 7 instead of 9, I still think it's a great thing that we
Yeah.
have these students coming.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Next up, recommendation to PDT on initial scoping of facilities. So we had workshop numbers over on the left that are the strict construction costs. They're I call them the fully loaded numbers that have us trying to apply for state money for state revolving funds. Also on the side, we're going to wait for the next call for a major building fund. And we were speculating at the workshop when that'll happen. We have no idea. The political climate in Augusta just changed, but they were, a lot of articles, Maine Public Radio did a series on how that program has completely run out of money. It was designed to spend $200 million in 5 years, and they've only spent $175 million in, I think it was 20 years. So it's very hard to speculate what's going to happen to that. But we've identified probably not a new building, but a major renovation at the middle school to slot into that slot when that comes. So that's my summary. Other board members or Meredith, you should feel free to chime in with things I missed or other thoughts or feedback you want to give to these committees as a charge.
Well, I would just say that when we met to review all of the information and the summary of what was gathered at the forum, we looked a lot at that versus the cost estimates that we've been given to try to come up with numbers that we think are a starting point that helps us accomplish some of the highest priority items. And I think that, I'm not sure you were in that, you were. That was prior to. Yeah, so, I guess I wonder if board members have had any further thoughts or thinking about that since we met, because that was a couple of weeks ago, and it was fresh off our mind off the forum, and if you've had any further thoughts since we had that discussion that night about those kind of scoping numbers for each of the 4 areas.
Yeah, that was definitely intended as a summary of current state, and tonight's the night we're looking to finalize that, so.
And really just kind of for the sake of the public to remind people, the recommendations of the study estimated that it would take $28 million to accomplish the recommendations that were put forth in the study. And so our scoping is at about half of that. Brian kind of did a nice job of summarizing why we came in at that number of where we feel like we want to have as a starting point. But it really is something that we have a lot of questions that have to be answered to know if these numbers are in the right ballpark. So that's really the work of the committees that have to roll up their sleeves with the help of the architects and some further studies and analyses that I mentioned when we were talking earlier. So I guess those are my thoughts.
Yeah, Jeff, any thoughts you have?
Well, I sent in a written comment because I knew I wouldn't have been, couldn't be at the last workshop. But the thing I appreciate most about the work that you all did was that you've identified it's a starting point, right? That these aren't final numbers, and that based on the committee's recommendations and our recommendations from PDT, we still have the ability to adjust these to see what's in the best interest of the district and taxpayers and things like that. Thanks.
Yeah, I would hate for anybody to add up the numbers we said tonight and go out and say if that's what the bond's going to be. It's too early for us to be at that point. April is when we'll be at that point, and these numbers could go up or down, and we have to get a little deeper into the design work to see what it is we can actually get for what we're paying and what it is we can afford and what it is we need and how we balance those two things. So it's a starting point, and I think that's the phrase I would like to emphasize. It's not a final number. And everybody else who was there still happy with the summary of things?
Yeah, I'm still comfortable.
I just have a brief clarifying question. Did I understand?
To the podium, sorry. I know, it's a long way.
Yeah, we'll take a question, but normally we try and keep public comment to the 2 public comment periods.
It's just a clarifying question. All I want to know is, did I understand, I think I might have misunderstood, the numbers that you gave for each one of those 4 areas, does it include or not include the contingency and design fees?
Those include contingency
Okay,
and design.
that's all I
fees.
want to know. Thank you.
Yep. All right, any other thoughts from the board on this? We do have, we do appoint the committees later under action items, but any other thoughts in the discussion frame at the moment? Seems like we have a plan forward. So lots of committee meetings over the next 6 months, and assuming all stays on track, we'll be looking to pull together a final plan in April and head that towards a bond in June. Okay, next up, action items. Co-curricular recommendations. I would nominate the 3 co-curricular nominations, which are Tracy DeShane for middle school girls B basketball, Bass and Branch Flower for the Nordic ski at the middle school. That's the new pilot this year. And Angie McLaughlin as a mentor at ASA. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, we already did the field trip. Survey. So I apologize for the lateness of this. This is my fault. The airlines my week did not go as I planned. This is just a copy of the 2017 survey. It's a public document. You all have seen it. Hopefully, well, the board members for sure all filled it out. Here is the goals the board set. Remember, we make a distinction, the board goals versus the superintendent goals, but actually, can I grab one of those back? Thank you. And then this is a personnel document, so this is not a public document, but these were the last set of goals we have that the board set in an executive session with the superintendent. We did not set any this August because we've kind of been shifting back and forth about the timing. So my question is, at least by the next meeting, I would like to have final approval to send the survey out. Recognizing that I'm springing this on you, I just wanted to get feedback. I think my main question, what I remember is we wanted to add some more clarity about not feeling like you have to answer every question if you don't have any information about these questions. But the other thing I think we've gone back and forth about is the goals and whether we wanted to survey people on the goals or not. So that's something I would like to get feedback from the board. These goals are, they're not the goals for this year. The goals for this year would either come from, you know, the goals that are in the personnel document, which we might need to go into executive session to discuss, or the public goals, which were set in a public forum. So we could do no goals, we could do district goals, since the superintendent's obviously a key part of that, or we could do other more personnel-related goals as well. So open for general feedback, and also I'd like feedback particularly about whether we want to do goals this year or not.
And you want to have this ready to go, you want us to approve a survey by the December, whatever it is, 11th meeting, is that the point?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Then I think, and whether we do this here in executive session, I guess, is something we need to decide. But if we're going to, for the goals part, I'd like to hear, before I make a decision, what Meredith would like to do in terms of that, particularly since right now we're just dealing with district goals. We didn't do a goal-setting process for her this year. So before I could weigh in on what you're asking for the goals part, I'd like to hear what her thoughts on that are. And if we're going to discuss, I would think if we're going to discuss the stuff from the personnel document from 17, 18 goals, we'd probably need to do that in executive session.
Correct.
So for a point of clarification, is the question whether we want to include the goals in the evaluation survey that goes out to the all the stakeholders, is that correct?
Right, choice one is whether to even have the goals. I think there's been some comments in the past that the 6 ISLEC standards
Is enough.
are quite
Yep.
comprehensive and also quite, long enough. On the other hand, other years, we felt like we had a goal that was important, and it was important to get feedback on that. So, yeah, question one is, do we want goals at all? And I think the board has gone back and forth on that. And then question two is, if we do want goals, where do those goals come from? Because, as I mentioned, because of the shifting timing, we haven't actually formally set goals that are necessarily completely current, specific to the superintendent. Any thoughts on whether we should include goals or just chop it off at the 6 ISLIC standards?
I mean, I think the facilities part is really clearly a huge element of what's going on this year, and I'm trying to read on the fly where if that fits into any of these ISLIC standards, but if it doesn't, then we need to have that in here. If nothing else, I would think we'd have to have that in there.
Yeah, just looking at the public goals, the two that stand out to me that I might think would be worth seeking stakeholder feedback on would be the facilities and the sustainable curriculum process.
I think so.
You're welcome to share thoughts on that too, Meredith.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm happy to work with Brian on updating these goals, and you guys could choose at the December meeting if there are any that you feel are, because the ISLIC goals are broad and not very specific. So something like facilities work, which is a big part of what we're doing this year and what I'm involved with, is really not even, I mean, it's implied under management, but that's about it. So I think we would get more specific feedback on some of these to ask them more explicitly. And I'm fine with doing that, so. I need to update my goals.
Yeah, we can do that. Well, we can see if it makes sense before we send the survey out or as part of the review process. Yep. Sounds like we're leaning towards maybe including a few goals, but maybe not 6 or 7 goals like we've done in the past.
If I'm correct, it looks like we did 6 goals last year, right, in addition to the ISLIC?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm happy to include as many or as few as one, depending on what other people want. But I guess the one thing I would say is the facilities one, I think, is just such a big component of what's going on this year, and Meredith is, along with Brian, leading that process, that I think that has to be in there. But I'm also happy to have others too, or if everybody's happy with that, that's fine. But I think that one has to be there.
I agree with Mark, but maybe we can economize a little bit. It seems like the proficiency-based diploma goal that was in the previous survey is
Yep.
kind of moot at this point.
Yep. I kind of assumed it, but just asked the question, is everybody still happy with having the ISLIC component? That seems to have worked well for several years, but I think we've shortened the wording to the point where it's effective with the public
I'm
at this
fine
point.
with that portion, leaving it essentially as we had it last year.
Okay. We don't have to wordsmith tonight, but if anybody has wordsmithing, if you can mail that to me in the next week, that would be helpful. So, all right, so I think we're heading towards 1 or 2 facilities for sure. I put out there one suggestion of sustainable curriculum. Are there anything?
Which is fine. I mean, like I said, I'm happy to have them all if people want them all, but I think that's the one that we have to have. But if other people want more, that's fine too.
Well, am I correct in saying that based off this document, there could be 9 goals, right?
We're
Which I don't
looking
think any of us support, but
So
am
we're
I-
looking at the personnel document then. at this
correct,
point.
yes.
Right.
Yep, that's where these goals would come from, correct?
Well, we've had them both ways, right? We've used board goals in the past, and that's, I think, what we need to
Yeah,
decide on.
exactly. Let's,
So-
right.
And I mean, some of the personnel goals are related to personnel issues that would never be public, but yep. The other thing, I mean, in fairness to Meredith, is to recognize that this is a somewhat dated document. She's never been formally charged with this for the 2018-19 year.
Yeah, I think anything from that would have to have the opportunity for Meredith to update that and then present that to us for possible inclusion. I wouldn't be comfortable taking anything from this one without her having the opportunity to change it and weigh in on it.
Anybody feel a strong calling for a goal other than facilities? I mean, how about you, Meredith? You feel like there's substantial things you're investing time in that are not captured in the ISLIC standards?
We can get the answer to that question at the next
We can-
meeting too,
yep,
right?
yep.
I mean, that could be something to think about and come back, work with Brian and then come back the December 11th meeting and, kind of say, well, after thinking about this might be appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, just on first glance, I think the curriculum and instructional leadership is really pretty explicitly about standard 2. And so
Yep.
I think it's pretty well covered in the ISLIC, whereas I don't think facilities is explicitly covered.
No, I don't think it is either.
But I'd have to really look down over some of the others and reflect on if there's anything missing from this list that we would want to include this year. That's really the one that stands out to me. But I can work with Brian on updating this and bring this to you at the next meeting. You can look at that in executive session, see if there's anything that you feel like you want to add in. Maybe, would that be an okay way to proceed?
Yeah, that
Works for
sounds
me.
good.
One thing I would like to, that I think, if we're only talking about, we've been saying this one goal, I would not like to have the ISLIC standards and then just one goal under the goal thing, because she's not just facilities, that's on us too. I don't want everyone to be like, it's all about Meredith there, because that ink shouldn't go on her, because there's gonna be some of that.
That's a good point.
So I want there to be other things that,
It's gotta have at least one companion.
yeah.
Brian's proposed one, and I'm fine with that too, so.
Well, I mean, Meredith's right that ISLIC does cover a lot of the curriculum. The other one that jumps out to me is the K-12 social and emotional. I know, I know the principals and the teachers are working hard on
Yeah.
that too, but that is something that's happening across the district. So that might be, if we're looking for another goal, that's another option. I also think we might just get general interest and feedback independent of.
Yeah. It's fun too.
All right, so, yeah, don't want to put anybody on the spot,
Give
but
that back.
but yes, my plain, yes, the confidential document I would like back. I will work with Meredith, and if you have any wordsmithing, please send that to me. And we'll take a final vote on this next week.
Sounds good.
2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I was
2
gonna say,
weeks.
not,
Yep, 2 weeks. Oh, you don't want another meeting? Come on. All right, so approval of contract for concept design. We lined up funding earlier tonight, but it's a contract that's large enough the board has to approve it.
Yeah, so, we've seen this before because we reviewed it back when they provided it to us. But just to refresh your memory on the contract, so, I think they will provide us with an actual, document that we would sign. This is their proposal for their full services contract. So I noticed in this, there's not a place for Brian to sign in here. So we would need to ask them for that. But this is the proposal that I think the motion would need to authorize Brian to sign the contract that follows this proposal as they presented it to us. One of the things that I noticed, Aaron, you were mentioning in our workshop about the fee schedule that's here, and so this is a useful document that you might want to tuck away in your facilities folder, because it does have those state approved the fee schedule for the services that we're engaging in. New construction costs versus renovated versus I think the other one is like outdoor facilities or libraries have different fee schedule. So this is a useful document for that as well. So this is where we got the $136,000 figure, because in this document they explained that concept design phase is would be 2/3, or schematic design phase is 2/3 complete approximately when we go through this work that we're doing leading up to a bond. So that's the 2/3 of their schematic design estimate of 153,300 total. And then they also indicated the additional pre-referendum costs and some like the 6F geotech study, traffic study, hazmat report, topographic survey, et cetera, structural analysis. There's several of those there, and then the reimbursables. So that's what we're approving a contract to pay. But in total, you know, this is the total fee proposal for their services.
Can I just ask, is everybody comfortable approving? Just sign a contract that you haven't seen, or do you want to wait until we actually have a contract in 2 weeks? I mean, obviously, I would consult with a lawyer. We would get a lawyer's opinion, and Meredith and I both read contracts pretty carefully, but it's really up to the board whether you want to have the actual contract in hand or authorize us to sign a contract.
And I don't think there's any, it doesn't make a difference doing it tonight or two weeks from now.
I mean, the other thing, though, is this is really a time and materials, right? It's not, there's not a price. We throw around the 136, but it depends on how much design we do. And as I mentioned in the public meeting, I think it's smart to do a lot of design up front, rather than, and really get your, this is the cheapest point to get our costs managed correctly. And so if it takes extra design to do that, I would want to do that at this point. So it's a time and materials. There's a number that's an estimate, but it's important to remember it's really time and materials and how much work these committees have with them going back and forth. Anybody want to make a motion, or want to wait till next 2 weeks?
I'm fine either way, so whatever everybody else wants is fine with me.
I would be the signer, so I'm not going to make the motion. If anybody else wants to make a motion, go for it. Otherwise, we'll just wait 2 weeks.
So in 2 weeks, we'd have an actual contract in hand, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Personally, I'm probably a little more comfortable with that.
I'm gonna wait for that. Okay.
Okay.
Wait it is.
So just to follow up on that, I guess we should ask PDT for their contract, and we should send it to Drummond and Woodsum immediately, and then you and I can go back and forth on it. Yep. All right, next up, appointment of committees for facilities concept design. So we had mentioned in the discussion component that we had 4 committees. We had applications from staff and community. Since we're discussing individuals in ways that could affect their reputation, we're going to do this, have the discussion in executive session. We'll appoint the names in public after we're done, but I would make a motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 405-6A, discussion of confidential information related to individuals. Is there a second?
A second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Since
There's a copy in there.
Yeah, where are we gonna have executive session?
Oh, is this?
There's a bunch of people in there. That room is full of people. I don't know, but they have computers, they're all like paper, and they're all stationed in there. Is there another, the lunchroom?
The lunchroom?
yeah.
Yeah, she's been on her race.